Our next presenter is Audrey Watters. Audrey is a writer who's worked in the education field for the past 15 years. She's done so as a graduate student, as a college instructor, and program manager for an ed tech nonprofit. 2 chapters into her comparative literature dissertation, Audrey decided to abandon academia, and she now happily fulfills the one job recommended by a junior high aptitude test, freelance writer. I think they've just taken that one out now, haven't they? Yeah.
No, in the future we're all freelance writers.
We're all freelance writers, okay. Audrey's work has appeared in a variety of publications, The Atlantic, Edutopia, Mindshift, Fast Company, Inside Higher Ed, the School Library Journal, O'Reilly Radar, Read Write Web, which I thought was easier to say than I thought, Campus Technology, and the Huffington Post. In addition to her own blog, Hack Education, which you haven't checked out, is absolutely wonderful. She's currently working on a book called Teaching Machines, due out in 2014, that will explore the push to automate education. Please welcome Audrey Watters.
Thank you. So last week before last, Gardner Campbell wrote a really wonderful blog post that I took to heart about optimism and technology. I think when you're a couple of chapters into writing a book about robots and teaching, you sort of need to go back and be reminded by people like Gardner that technology isn't actually always necessarily this completely monstrous, dystopian, wretched future. His post was about optimism, and he argued that that's why we're in education. I mean, we are optimists if we think about the future as we think about the future with technology. That being said, I've decided today to go full dystopian when we were asked to talk about the vision of the future of higher education. My mind immediately went to the words of Sebastian Thrun, who's an AI researcher. He's the creator of Google's self-driving car. He's the co-founder of Udacity, the MOOC startup. He's a Stanford professor. He's a Googler. And he said in Wired magazine that in 50 years' time, there will be only 10 institutions in the world delivering higher education, and Udacity, his startup, has a shot at being one of them. So that is a pretty profound vision for the future of higher education. And I think it makes for an interesting mental exercise, right? How would we end up there? What has to happen for us to get to 10? And of course, you know, who would those 10 be? So this is my stab. This is my stab at the 10. With apologies, I know it's really rude to be invited to a university and not include them on the 10. So my apologies to the University of Mary Washington, but I didn't even include the University of Bologna, which is the first university in the world, because I see this as actually a completely neo-colonial enterprise. This will actually be English only. The future of higher education is English only. So of course, Oxford and Cambridge, the first 2 English-speaking universities in the world, they will survive, as will Harvard, because it has an endowment probably large enough to make higher education free for anyone who attends that college for the next 300 years, although I'm sure they'll still continue to charge people regardless. MIT, they'll exist. They're closely enough intertwined with the business and tech industry. Stanford will definitely be around. Peter Thiel, as much as he wants to tell students to drop out of college, I'm sure that he and his venture capitalist cronies are investing a lot of money. I put Princeton on the list and not Yale, even though Yale has a larger endowment fund. Princeton's endowment fund is per capita the largest in the world. So I think Princeton will be around. Suffice it to say, Udacity will not be around. I predict that Google will acquire Udacity in 2014 and launch the University of Google. Coursera will be acquired as well by Pearson, the largest education company in the world. I believe that The University of Phoenix will be acquired by the University of Walmart in 2017. And because, because my friend Dave Wiley is here, of course, but also because the Mormon Church owns BYU, I really actually don't think BYU is going anywhere. So that's my 10. That's my 10. I debated putting the University of Amazon on there. Maybe Jeff Bezos will buy Kaplan. He bought the Washington Post, but maybe he'll just buy the rest of Kaplan and launch a university. But more than likely, he'll just sort of resell courses from some of these other places. So, but I think that this is, I think that it's worth thinking about. There are 17,000 some odd universities and colleges in the world today. So somehow, according to Sebastian Thrun, we're going to have to get to 10. And we're going to have to get to a place, too, in that quote, where the kind of things that are happening at Udacity are degreed, they're accepted, and that people would actually brag that they got their degree from the University of Walmart. Udacity. So how would we end up there? Well, I'm really glad that John Becker is here, because I'm sorry to say that the first thing that we'd have to do, John, is end college sports. Right. There's no way we can have March Madness or bowl games with only 10 universities anyway. So, and there is the pending lawsuit against the NCAA from student athletes. So you never know. Perhaps that whole sham will crumble more quickly. Perhaps many universities can just rebrand. My alma mater, the University of Oregon, I think could easily become Phil Knight Center for Football Studies, and it would be perfectly fine. So that's the number one thing, and college sports. Number two, we have to axe public funding for education. To get to 10 universities in the world, that's one of the things on the list. My list of top 10 universities, or 10 remaining universities, only contains one public institution. I'm not sure if you noticed that, and that would be Cambridge. And that's in England, and they're socialists, so they'll probably do that anyway. But American politicians can go ahead and utterly defund schools here. I think we'd have to clarify as well that what the purpose of higher education is. And the purpose is job training, right? We'll have to push people into majors that employers dictate. There will be no more philosophy major upstarts. Sorry to anyone who's majoring in English, literature, or good riddance history. No, from here on out, it's marketing, business administration, programming, and drone repair, I think, is probably something that you might want to go into. Coursework will be dictated by employers, and this is, of course, where the University of Walmart and the University of Google will excel. This will be, actually, as Thrun puts it, how the people from Udacity will tout their degrees, not because it's prestigious, but because it's how they can demonstrate that they have the job preparation. Of course, some things won't change, right? If you are one of the very, 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 very few, the 1% who gets to go to Harvard or MIT, then the purpose of higher education will actually be to connect you to the network of venture capitalists and future secretaries of the Treasury. To get to only 10 universities in the world, we will have to dismantle our current research university system. Someone's going to have to pick up the brunt of what Johns Hopkins University's been doing. They didn't make the top 10. Someone's going to have to do medical research. They're also big into cryptography. Gosh, I wonder who'll handle that. Someone's going to have to pick up the pieces, and this is a wonderful irony, from the Milton Friedman Institute at the University of Chicago, but that just seems sort of apt, right, that gets taken over by private sector. Someone's going to have to figure out what happens to the Lawrence Livermore Lab stuff at UC Berkeley. Berkeley also did not make the list. But of course, much of this research can and will be outsourced to private corporations, undertaken by wealthy individuals who want to perhaps build their own galactic vehicles or tunnels to get people from the East Coast to the West Coast quickly. There's also think tanks. I figure if the furlough continues, Booz Allen will be looking for more work, so there's plenty for them here. Incidentally, if your research is in the humanities, you can always try Kickstarter. Sorry. We're going to have to kill graduate school. I mean, we'll still want to cultivate a few superstar professors, and maybe that can happen at Harvard and MIT, but that could probably also happen in Hollywood. So that actually doesn't have to be a function of the university at all. We'll have to rethink what expertise looks like, what domain expertise looks like, but with the rise of big data, who needs expertise? We'll just have algorithms. We'll have to agree with Sebastian Thrun, who says that higher education is about content delivery. But of course, thanks to the internet, content will be able to be delivered worldwide. Even with only 10 universities, we will not have to worry about the growing demand globally for education. As long as you have the right browser, if you're at the University of Google, of course, you'll be able to download Chrome for free. People will be able to learn anything they want on the internet. You hear that already. They'll be able to have educational content delivered to them with, of course, some major exceptions: walled gardens, licensing, and of course, copyright. The University of Pearson and its subsidiary Coursera will have full control of faculty IP. The University of Google and the University of Walmart will have total control over their students' data. But hey, they will make some really awesome recommendations for mortgage loans that you might want to get based on how well you score in calculus. So 10 universities of the world means that higher education as we know it will be unbundled. That's a special word. Unbundled. Someone other than universities will have to provide the services that extend beyond content delivery. Private companies will run football. Private companies will run tutoring. Private companies will do research. Private companies will handle assessment. Private companies will run student housing. Private companies will run daycare. Private companies will run mental health services. Private companies will guide students through their career paths. Thanks to big data, the University of Walmart and the University of Google will probably corner this market quite well. In 50 years, Sebastian Thrun says, there will only be 10 institutions in the world delivering higher education. I think he's totally wrong. None of this is inevitable, right? Not MOOCs, not the funding cuts, not the death of the giant brick and mortar research institution, or the death of the small liberal arts college. No matter how gleefully the libertarians and the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley rub their hands together and twist their snidely whiplash mustaches as they plot the demise of these institutions, I just don't think that this has to happen. I don't think that all of the stories about innovation have to be stories about profit, and I certainly don't think it has to be stories about doom. So what stands in the way? I mean, I think we stand. I think we stand in the way. I think we can resist. I think that there are other things that we offer. I think that we have, as Alan said, we have community. We have open networks. We believe in open content. We believe in sharing. We believe that place matters. We believe a place on and offline matters, one that isn't dictated by market forces. We believe in local expertise, but we believe in extending that to the rest of the world. We believe in local support. We believe in leveraging technology to connect local learners and local expertise to everywhere. We care about students. We have connections with one another. We appreciate wonder and curiosity and the intellectual serendipity that happens on a campus that doesn't necessarily happen. Although I would say some of the recommendation emails I get from Coursera are pretty serendipitous about what they think classes I might be interested in. But that's not what I'm talking about. So I think, but I do think we can resist this sort of narrative that the university is about to be obliterated by something else. But I think we have to offer a stronger and a louder and a better articulated vision of what our vision of the future would look like. I think that it's really actually quite easy to paint a nightmare scenario about some of these things. I think it's much more challenging to sort of lay out a bold and loud vision for a more progressive future. But I think it's completely possible, and I think that many of the people in this room are absolutely doing that already. Thank you.
And we are open for Q&A.
Great, you all agree with me. Cool.
Hi, I'm Carol Herney from James Madison University. And I work in faculty development. Faculty already think that education is about content delivery. I'm a biologist, and so how do we move that? I mean, I know there are the select few that sort of ascribe to the notion that we have something more to give, but I work with a whole lot of faculty who think that that is in fact their job.
I mean, I think that that's, I mean, I do think that this is part of the stories that we tell about what schooling looks like, and I don't think it's new at all. I mean, I think that there have long been images of opening up students' minds and, you know, pouring in the content, sealing it up, and sending them out into the world. But this is partly what I mean about sort of how do we do a better job of articulating this alternate view. I mean, I talk to a lot of folks who watched the same science fiction movies and read the same science fiction novels as I have, and I see some of these future technologies as being like really frightening, like the Matrix, where you get the thing injected in your back of your head, which is really just the new content delivery. It's just, you know, knowledge is injected into your head. It's being really excited and super efficient, and wouldn't it be awesome if you could lay in bed and have, you know, the knowledge of Kung Fu injected into you. So I mean, I do think we have to say, no, that's actually a horrible vision. And we have these other stories that we can tell. But I think that part of the way in which our institutions are structured around what the expectations are for students, I think that they lead us to these answers of content delivery. I do think that we have to have conversations about what is the purpose of our higher education. And if the purpose of higher education is football, then we should all run down a certain track and be a lot more like the University of Oregon. If the purpose of higher education is content delivery, then I think that we can move towards a different sort of future. If we want to articulate a different way of thinking about what the future can look like, I think we need to sort of tell better stories. That's a really, sorry.
Hi, I'm Steve Nodine at George Mason University, and I'm wondering if we accept that there's the value to the bundle, how do we square that with the movement, the advantages, the affordances that distance education and so forth affords us? How can we retain the value of the bundle, the value of place, and still accommodate what many of us find to be a very beneficial area of development?
I think that the bundle can include distance learning, but I think that we have to recognize that many students, particularly students who are first-generation college students, students who are parents, students who are working, they need a lot more support than simply the content delivery piece. And so I think that there are services, bundled services, that the university offers that are important if we, you know, to sort of invoke a wonderful 70s, the whole child. We have to sort of think about what are all of these pieces that we offer students, because it really isn't for I would say for a growing number of students, it isn't simply that they can just take the content book delivery piece. They need help in a number of ways. They need help in thinking about how do they do research. They need help in thinking through their career path. They need help in navigating a bureaucratic institution that isn't always friendly to people who haven't been raised in a setting to sort of know how to navigate large bureaucracies. So I think that the bundle is particularly important for students. I think that the unbundling will hurt students who are already, I think, struggling to succeed in the institution as we have it today.
The question isn't bundling or not, bundling or a la carte. One thing that we might be forgetting is that the bundle changes over time.
Yes.
Appropriately. The other thing is that the bundle appropriate for one student may not be the same as the bundle appropriate for another. So we have to kind of weigh those things. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. It seems to me that one of the assumptions behind the trend that we're seeing is the idea of higher education as a private good. Okay. How do we get back to selling the idea of higher education as a public good? Because I think that's really critical.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think that this is a lot of these discussions that we're hearing now, particularly some of the president's proposals to think about ranking schools based on individuals' graduates' earnings. All of these seem to be predicated on the value of an education is not just the individual, but it's the individual's earning potential. So I think that the public, I feel like both at the K through 12 and at the higher education level, we very much have lost the thread in terms of the importance of education as a public good. I don't know if that's something horrifically American that we're sort of about us, that we're so interested in sort of individual attainment that we've lost the sort of, Ken talked about reciprocity, that we've lost this notion that we do exist in a community. But I think I also would say that some of these other movements around it, faculty, for example, doing a better job of articulating why their research should be open and accessible, not just to their 13 peers who happen to also study, 16th century Spanish courtly poetry, but like everyone should have access. Sorry, did I offend someone who studies Sorry. Okay. But I think that open access I think that faculty needs to make a better case for why their research matters, and not just matters because you can make like self-driving cars, but I do think that the humanities matter. I'm actually wildly biased in that sense. So.
Hi, Jonathan Levin. I'm the provost here at UMW. So I'm glad that we're not going to be reduced down to only 10.
I think he's revised it to 20.
Okay. But I think the fear that I have and others have is that we're in the middle of something. And when I spoke about this, when I started speaking about this about 3-4 years ago, I used the Bob Dylan line, "Something's happening here, but I don't know what it is." And you look at what happened in the publishing industry, what happened in the newspaper business, and you lost an enormous amount of diversity in a very short time. And you gained in other ways. Obviously, in journalism in particular, there were new things that emerged that are arguably good. But I think the landscape has really been tremendously changed. And I think the question for us in higher ed right now is, how much diversity are we going to lose, and what are we going to be left with in 10, 15, 20 years, 50 years? And I think the biggest fear that I have is that we're going to take a system that's already got a lot of inequality built into it in terms of access, and especially access to the kinds of resources that are available at the high prestige institutions, and it's only going to get a lot worse. That people who can't afford it, or people whose credentials aren't quite as strong when they're going into college, are going to be the ones left with the MOOCs or some version of MOOCs that's not even as good as what the MOOCs might be, because the professors teaching the MOOCs are superstars at least. So I just wonder if you might say something. For me, the question has really been, how is what we're doing going to be fundamentally changed, and the kinds of opportunities that are available going to be transformed by this process? I don't think we're all going to disappear. I think a lot of institutions are going to survive, but how are they going to be changed in the process, and how is that ultimately going to impact access to high-quality education?
I mean, I think that globally, we're facing an incredible demand for higher education, and it isn't simply sort of the president's mandate here that everyone who graduates from high school should also go on and complete college. I mean, if you think about places in the developing world where people are absolutely interested in accessing higher education, I think that we have to think about, though, what is it that we're going to scale? Are we going to scale and replicate and copy and send out video lectures, or are we going to use the internet and use the web to help leverage human connection and the relationships that we can build with one another? I mean, and I do see the MOOCs in particular, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I do see a lot of this as being quite a colonial enterprise, where you have these large, powerful institutions that have decreed that somehow their professor of, I could pick on so many MOOC superstar professors, but their professor in whatever discipline it is somehow the best professor, and that one person's content will suffice for everyone, which is ludicrous. I mean, it's ludicrous in terms of thinking that we only want one professor teaching Shakespeare, but it's ludicrous to think that a professor at Harvard would know the best way to teach Shakespeare to a bunch of students at a local community college in Oklahoma. I mean, I think we know that education is a deeply human and relationship-based interaction. Even if we like to think of it as is very much about content mastery, it really is still about building relationships. And I do fear that unless we speak up and push back, that we are going to be sort of creating a larger divide with the students who get to go to the few very wealthy students, very well-connected students that get to experience human touch, and then the rest of us that get a televised version of that. So I mean, I do think that it is a real threat.
And I think with that, we need to conclude this session's Q&A. Please join me in thanking